In the previous session, I described a refocusing process at Crossroads Church, and began to ask questions about the role of power in this kind of direction-setting process. In order to generate insights about the intersections of power during Crossroads' direction-setting process, I employed various sets of theoretical lenses, including those related to power and shared perspectives. Let's look at the set of power lenses first. Gordon and Grant, in their article Knowledge Management or Management of Knowledge, proposed three power categories: power as entity, power as strategy, and power is knowledge. In coming up with these three categories, Gordon and Grant surveyed a wide variety of literature related to power and knowledge management. Many of these articles tended to picture power as a determinable entity, a resource that leaders can acquire and grow like a leadership position. They contend that even though viewing power as an entity is useful, it doesn't adequately take into account the power at play in strategic interactions between people. They maintain that relationships and the actions that emerge from those relational connections function as sources of power as well. In other words, people in positive relationships will tend to have more influence in each other's lives. However, they also believe that a third major approach to power exists. They contend that power is in fact knowledge itself. For example, power structures often provide parameters around what is acceptable knowledge. These same power structures often repel or minimize contradictory knowledge. Power becomes knowledge because it determines the nature of acceptable knowledge in a given context. Gordon and Grant's conceptions of power provide a complex understanding of power that encompasses both traditional and postmodern approaches to power. Gordon and Grant write from a knowledge management perspective, which is particularly relevant for direction-setting processes that involve the construction and management, even manipulation, of direction-oriented knowledge, like an organization's mission, core values, vision, and strategic plan. Because of their comprehensive survey of the power and knowledge management literature and inclusion of postmodern ways of conceiving power, I've chosen to use their set of lenses for viewing power to frame my understanding of the use of power during Crossroads' direction-setting process. Okay, the second set of lenses related to the sharing of perspectives. It's where people come together and agree about something. Robert Weber, in his book Younger Evangelicals, has articulated a framework for understanding church perspectives amongst evangelical Christians. Even though he uses the term evangelicals, many of his ideas apply to other Christian faith traditions as well. Weber believed that evangelical Christians hold to three basic church perspectives, which he called traditional, pragmatic, and younger evangelical. The traditional evangelicals in Weber's description tend to reflect a modern, as opposed to postmodern, perspective. Brian McLaren, in More Ready Than You Realize, describes this modern perspective as a broad, coherent culture in Western civilization, arising more or less in the 16th century and developing through the 20th, a culture dominated by science, consumerism, conquest, rationalism, mechanism, analysis, and objectivity. According to Weber, traditional evangelicals view Christianity as a rational worldview. They tend to prefer pastor-centered neighborhood churches with traditional forms of worship. Pragmatic evangelicals, according to Weber, are products of market-driven economies that constantly seek to increase production and boost profits. Because of their emphasis on numerical growth, pragmatic evangelicals prefer large churches that require pastoral CEOs to run them. These churches often employ contemporary worship methods to attract new people. Pragmatic evangelicals find their spirituality in success. When they feel that their efforts for God are successful, as evidenced in numerical growth, they feel that they are growing spiritually as well. The permission to think critically about Christian beliefs and practices has gained even greater momentum in recent years amongst the group that Weber calls younger evangelicals. They want meaningful relationships, not efficient programs, authenticity and transparency, not pretending, and being overdoing. Sounds a lot like millennials. According to Weber, younger evangelicals view Christianity as a community of faith. They prefer small churches that emphasize team leadership. They tend to want a convergent style of worship that uses traditional and contemporary methods for helping worshipers converge on a particular biblical theme. For younger evangelicals, spirituality is the authentic embodiment of biblical values. They want to live out their faith in very practical ways that make a difference in their lives, their communities, and the world. The preferred values of younger evangelicals are, in many ways, a reaction to some of the ideals of pragmatic evangelicals, but they also reflect the influence of postmodern thinking. Weber's categorization of evangelicals in terms of three perspectives provides a helpful framework for understanding subculture perspectives and potential clashes between perspective-based groups in churches. Understanding church perspectives is important for understanding how these cultural subgroups can influence direction-setting processes. As people coalesce around a particular perspective, the power of that perspective increases. The perspective struggles themselves are exertions of power that define what is acceptable and even true for that particular group. Perspective groupings represent an important source of power. In some instances, the groups may fall along relational lines in keeping with Gordon and Grant's power as strategy approach to power. However, the groupings may also organize around ideological principles as described by Weber. When a shared perspective grouping gains dominance in an organization, they can often determine the nature of acceptable knowledge. In these cases, power then becomes knowledge, in keeping with Gordon and Grant's third approach to power. Okay, with these theoretical lenses in place, we can begin to explore who exercised power during Crossroads' refocusing process, the focus of our next session.